Hello guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to implement Google oauth2 login in your Chrome extensions. Now before we get started, make sure you have all your files ready. The manifest.json file, the popup.html file and the popup.js file. So you can open up your files and the first thing we want to actually do is to install the extensions. So go to Google Chrome and then open up the extension settings. And to install your extension, just go to the directory of your extension and take the whole extension file and drop it inside of Chrome. So once you install your extension, you are going to get your application ID. So go back to your extension JavaScript file. Now the first thing we want to do is to call upon window.unload. And what this will do is that it will allow us to run our code as our extension is loading. So let's create a function. Sorry. Now the next thing we want to do is to generate a token for our authentication process. So in order to get our token, we can use the chrome.identity.getAuth token function. This function takes two parameters. The first parameter is an object, while the second parameter is also a function. Now the second parameter also takes a parameter, and the parameter it takes is the token generated. Now let's print out our token generated using console.log then token. So when you run the extension and you check your console, you are going to get your token. So save the JS file, and then before running the extension, there are some things you need to do. So the first thing you need to do is that you need to get a client ID. If you don't have one, let me walk you through the process of getting it. So you need to go to Google console, and then go into Google console. Then on the search bar, search for credentials. So under your credentials, you should create credentials and then create using OAuth client ID. So you should follow the process of creating a client ID. Then after you are done creating a client ID, you are going to do what I'm doing next. So I already have my own client ID, and it's for the Chrome app. Create the client ID for Chrome app. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the client ID, and I'm going to change this application ID to the extension application ID. Now this application ID you get for your extension is temporary. It's only for development purpose. When you push your extension to the Chrome store, you should be given a new listing client ID. So we're going to use this one for now for development purpose. So go back to Google console and then change the application ID. Sorry. So after changing the application ID, save. Then copy your client ID. So after copying your client ID, go back to your files and go to your manifest.json file. Now you need to create a new object called oauth2, and it's going to have this thing. It's going to be an object here, and it's going to have a key, client ID, which is going to be our client ID, and it's also going to have another key, which is scope. This scope contains an array of URLs that are permitted by the application. Since we are using the application for Google authentication, we are going to permit two URLs. So I'm just going to copy and paste them here. You can find the URL in the description below. Now I just remember this scope is actually scopes mistake. And finally, you want to give your extension permission. So the permission we are going to give it is this thing, the identity permission, or identity. Yeah, sorry. So that's all for the manifest.json file. Now save the file and then go back to Chrome. Now under Chrome, um bring down the extension tab and then run your oauth extension. So when you check the inside missing console, so we have an error here in our pop.js. So let's fix the error. So the error is in our function here we didn't give it these two parentheses. So save that and go back to the Chrome extension. Then under Chrome, let's reload this. It's giving us errors. So we have another error in our manifest file. Apparently I forgot to put a comma at the at position 22 or so. Also the error here is this thing, I forgot to put a comma here, and this thing is actually permissions, not permission. So save that and go back to Chrome. Now in Chrome, reload the extension, and after reloading the extension, bring down the extension tab here and then run it again. So when you inspect the console again, you see that our token has been printed out. So this is the token we are going to use to implement login via Google. So cancel this and then let's implement the login via Google. Now go back to the code under the JavaScript file. So after printing out our token, we are going to make an HTTP request to a URL. I'm going to be using the fetch API for this. So fetch. Now our request is going to take our token. So make sure to add it there. Token. Now let's turn our response to JSON. And then let's print out our response in JSON format. So what this code does is it makes a request to the Google oauth2 API, and then it passes the response into a JSON format, and then it prints out the JSON format. So now save the JavaScript file and then go back to Chrome. So under Chrome, make sure to reload the extension and then bring down the extension tab. Then click on the oauth2 extension. Now let's check our console. Now when you check the console, you are going to have the token, which is standard, and then you are going to have the object which is being returned. So this is the information of the user. Normally it's going to prompt the user to log in via Google, but because I'm already logged in, so it doesn't ask me to log in again. So listen, that's all for this tutorial.